Hi, I'm Cassandra.
And I'm Kayte.
And we are part of the cultural engagement team at Central Bedfordshire Council.
This is Story Search, where we share stories of arts, culture, community and heritage from across Central Bedfordshire. So welcome to part 2 of the Story Search episode on Leighton Buzzard. We are going to return to Cassandra and Dr Kay Waddilove having a very deep discussion about the themes in this children's book. And prior warning, they go deep. They are going to be talking about lockdown, feminism, class systems and war. Cassandra also takes a visit to the home of Mary Norton, which is now filled with lots of children who she's going to interview because it is Leighton Middle School, which is right in the heart of Leighton Buzzard and was the home of Mary Norton, which is the setting for the book The Borrowers. So if you haven't already listened to part 1, go back now and we'll see you afterwards.
I'll share it with you. 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 I'll share it with you.
A couple of other things that you had picked up on. You talked about marginalisation, and I had an inkling towards lockdown and similarities to that. Where do you want to pick up first?
Okay, so just going back a little bit, we were talking about the similarities, how the book is grounded in the social climate of the 1950s. And one of the things that we didn't say is we talked about home being a really important theme in all of these books. One of the things that, of course, was also very prevalent in the early 1950s when Norton was writing this book, or the late 40s, whenever she wrote it, is that so many homes had been destroyed. Okay, so we're living in a time of austerity and rationing and shortages, exactly as the borrowers were in the books. But so many homes had been destroyed because of the bombing. And there's a wonderful description at the end of The Borrowers, I think I can find it here, when Mrs. Driver has brought in the rat catcher and destroyed the borrower's house. You know, they pulled up the floorboards and the clocks are trying to escape. What she says in this quote is, "It was a shambles, partitions falling, earth floors revealed, matchsticks, an old cogwheel, scattered bottle tops. It could be a description of any house that had been blitzed during the Second World War." And I think that Norton was very aware of this. One of the when we get onto marginalisation, one of the quotes when she was writing about her book was about how she felt that the little people, the borrowers, were relevant to the powerless people, the displaced people after the Second World War, the people who'd been turfed out of Europe, and so on. And I think she was a very self-aware writer, and she was clearly painting a picture in what happened to the borrowers with what happened to the population of big cities like London, Liverpool, Southampton, and so on during the borrowing. So that, I think, is definitely relevant to the home, the destruction of the home. And when the borrowers, in the subsequent books, when they move, they're driven out at the end of the first one, but they find other homes. First of all, they live in a boot, then they live in a kettle. Then at one stage they find a home in a model village, which is clearly Bekonscot, although it isn't named as Bekonscot because that's in Buckinghamshire. But they found a home in a model village, and that doesn't work either. So they have all these different homes, and they're all temporary. And then when I was reading that, I thought, well, this is, I don't know if you know, but after the war, because people were so short of homes, the government built lots of prefabs. They were temporary homes made of asbestos and cardboard, I think. And you do wonder whether these homes that the borrowers inhabit, all of which proved to be unsuitable in some way, was a sort of a mirror of the prefab building before the government built permanent homes and, the housing stock came back to normal. So I thought that was another interesting sideline where Norton is looking to time what was happening socially in the world that she lived in with the lack of home.
Story Search, Central Bedfordshire.
That was another thing.
I don't know if I've researched Mary Norton enough, but I understand her father was a physician. We know where she lived in Leighton Buzzard. It's a beautiful old building, a huge building for, I assume, one family. Mary Norton would have been middle class, upper middle class?
Upper middle class. If her father was a surgeon, she would have been upper middle class, definitely. Yeah.
But is writing about people in different circumstances from herself?
She is. Yeah, I think that the whole class thing is fascinating because she's clearly this is business about looking backwards, back into Edwardian times. She's clearly constructing the clocks as a sort of hard-working, worthy rural poor. You know, the sort of people that in a way, the servant class. I mean, they're not servants because, as you pointed out earlier, they think that that the humans are there for them. You know, they're not serving the humans; they're preying on the humans. The way they're constructed, you know, Pod is your classic artisan, you know, hardworking cobbler, and he can make stuff and he can do anything. Homily is the house proud woman who keeps the house clean, and she's not dirty, difficult working class, and you know, Ariete we've already discussed. So I think she is basically looking at a class of people who are not her, who are not within her world. And the Aunt Sophie figure, the old aristocrat upstairs in the bedroom, is again a different class. If we're talking about class, you know, the British class system, there have been so many books written about it, you could go on forever, couldn't you? But the Aunt Sophie person is upper class. She's an aristocrat. She lives in this great big house, and she's the only person who lives there. The whole house is there to serve Aunt Sophie with her fine old Madeira. So I think Mary Norton admires this sort of tradition of hard-working, able working class, and to some extent she is critiquing the development of, you know, the welfare state. One of the great achievements of the UK government after the war was to establish a welfare state. But Mary Norton, I'm not saying she does this directly, but she was known to be a social conservative, no question. Not surprising with her upbringing. And she doesn't do this directly, but I think there is a tendency, you can read into it, that, you know, people need to be self-reliant. People need to climb up curtains and get what they want, or you know, go adventuring and find what they want, and not be given stuff. And the key to this is when the boy helps them, when the boy befriends them, and in return for Ariete reading to him, he brings the borrower, he brings the clocks, all sorts of furniture, posh furniture, from the doll's house that Pod couldn't reach, but the boy can reach it, and he brings it to them. And this basically is the cause of their destruction. The cause of their discovery is that Mrs. Driver, the nasty, evil housekeeper, realises that this stuff has disappeared, and that's how they get discovered. And it's a bit like, oh, you know, if you're helped too much, if the welfare state gives you anything, if you're too reliant on what you're given, things will go wrong. That has been one way that the borrowers has been read, and I think it's an interesting way.
That's an interesting take. I know that you've read the collection of books, and I just read the sort of, I don't know if it's a summary of the stories, or is it the first book in the series? I'm not sure. The most common
the first one.
The first one.
Yeah, it'd be the first one.
For me, in chapter 18, that was the moment where it's the destruction of the borrower's home, and they sort of become refugees. It says they're going to get the rat catcher from the town hall at Leighton Buzzard. There won't be nowhere in the house that's safe, says Pod. We've got to emigrate, he said. And Ariete began to cry, and she began to cry, I'm so happy.
They're going.
So happy.
She's escaping. She's escaping. Yeah. As another aside, I'll stop going back to the 1950s in a moment. But as another aside, have we a relevance here to the fact that they get the rat catcher, and what the rat catcher does is gas out, or tries to, he fails, gas out.
Wow.
What has just happened to a huge population in Europe, a population that was othered, the Jewish population, the traveller, the gypsy population, they were gassed, weren't they?
Yes.
You know, Norton must have known all this. There's so much there that's a metaphor.
I'm so glad we're talking to you about this, because I'm reading it and
on.
I'm not making those connections. And the moment you're saying it, I'm thinking to myself, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Story Search, Central Bedfordshire.
But you see, what I thought was very interesting about your emails, Cassandra, is that the connection with lockdown I hadn't made, and I thought, well, this is interesting because all those historical connections, that's my job. I'm a social historian. I had made, but the lockdown, when you mentioned it a lot in your emails, and I thought, yes, of course, this confinement, and this brings the book even more up to date. I mean, I had absolutely thought it was up to date in terms of the development of feminism and independence for women and economic rights for women and all of that stuff. But lockdown brings it to last year, doesn't it? Or was it the year before? I don't know. Whenever.
We've all lost track.
20. It's the year before, isn't it? We're now in 24. It brings it back to 22. How relevant is this? Because they were living a lockdown life.
They were living a lockdown life, and all these sort of cultural activities and pastimes that we then revisited ourselves, the knitting, the mending, the journaling. You know, these are things people re-established. That the busyness ended for many, not for all. I understand it was the busiest time ever for some. But for those who it wasn't busy for, just trying to coexist with somebody and it feeling like we're so stuck in this space. And the things we did to pass the time are very similar to that the borrowers did.
Absolutely. And I think that is so interesting. This is why I really like your reference to lockdown, and I spent a lot of time thinking about it after I got your email. All of these activities are internal. You do them indoors, things like knitting, writing a diary and stuff like that. And reading, the clocks, parents are very proud of the fact that Ariete can read. They see it as really important, and that's a sign of the development of women, opening up the world, because reading obviously takes you into other worlds, doesn't it? Reading gives you, it's like mirrors. There's a very famous quote, mirrors and windows. Reading can give you an insight into yourself, but also a window to the wider world. And Ariete is the one person in the family who can read. But you still do that indoors. It's an indoor activity. And what has happened since lockdown, maybe it was there before and I missed it, but certainly since lockdown, the revival of craft skills in the media, I've never watched any of these, but the Sewing Bee, the Great British Bake Off, Repair Shop, all of these things, they're all about reviving crafts that are done that could be done and were done
and
by many people
as well.
Upcycling, absolutely fantastic. This is this is how they live, isn't they?
They're very popular in our libraries as well currently. Groups of people coming to do all these activities.
It's amazing, isn't it? And this is like lockdown, post-lockdown. And as you say, the journaling thing, Ariete's diary, although she could only write one word every year, which was really, really quite funny. But it's now a part of the mental health climate, isn't it? Journaling is something you do to come to terms with issues you may have. It is quite fascinating.
Story Search, Central Bedfordshire.
And although I didn't mention this to you, I mean, I don't know about in your household, but I was the designated go to the supermarket once a week and try and get the things person. And actually, that going to the supermarket, seeing the empty shelves and thinking, well, how are we going to cope? What can I find today? Apricot Wheaties was the only cereal left. We don't eat those in our house, but we'll make do. And it's almost as Pod would find himself in the kitchen thinking, well, what's useful to take home and what can I find? That's the feeling I had in those supermarkets.
Absolutely. I mean, I was also the designated supply person, except that I didn't want to go to supermarket. So I was the person hanging on at 2 seconds to midnight trying to get a supermarket slot, a delivery slot. And then when you did, exactly as you said, you couldn't find half the things you wanted, you couldn't select. So you made do. My son brought me over a lot of food at that time, and he lives in a place where there's a lot of very small Turkish supermarkets and delis. So I ended up with masses of hard Turkish cheese, but that was it.
Why not?
We had it, we ate it. So that is definitely it, isn't it? It's like you take what's there, and as the ration shoppers did in the 1950s. You didn't go out and think, I'll buy a melon and an avocado and blah, 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 and we'll have this. You went and thought, that's in the shops. today we're having cabbage.
And I would come home with the shopping, and the family would be waiting there as if to say, what did you manage to get?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what homily is waiting
that's
for.
Exactly. Yeah. She basically, she tells Pod what she wants. You know, I want this, I want that. And Pod comes back and saying, well, I couldn't add that, but had this.
Tries his best.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah, it's very clever.
Yeah,
really,
clever. Really interesting. I'm glad that I was able to, give you a light bulb moment, as you have done for me today so many times.
Yeah.
One of my questions, and if you've got other directions you want to go, that's fine. But I'm really interested in how we can encourage our community here in Central Bedfordshire and in Leighton Buzzard specifically to remember and celebrate the borrowers for its legacy. As a teacher, academic, public librarian, and an expert in children's literature, please, could you give us some inspiration on some ideas on what you think we could be doing to make sure this book is remembered properly?
It certainly deserves to be remembered. I mean, there are lots of things, aren't there? I think, obviously, what you're doing, this story broadcast, which I'm really looking forward to hearing when it eventually gets into the public domain, for a book like this is in itself important. It's going to be out there. People who've never heard of it will listen, I hope, and think, oh, I might have a look at that. I might read that to my kids at bedtime or something like that. So I think the broadcasting, the media, bringing it up to the surface really is important. I do think, as an ex-librarian, that the role of the public libraries, though, is so vital, because the public libraries, if you're going to keep the magic of the borrowers going, there needs to be somewhere where you can find it, and the public library is a portal to that magic, isn't it? You walk in the doors, and if you, as you said, half of the copies in Bedfordshire are out. So someone has found that portal and is finding it. And it's terribly important, given funding issues in local government and so on, that public libraries are enabled to continue that role, because without it, there are people who are never going to find their way to these magical stories. Some of them are out of print. Actually, to be fair, The Borrowers has never been out of print since 1952, so that tells you something about it. One of the other things that is very helpful when you're trying to promote books and reading to children is to do things like to have celebrations. I'm sure your library services are doing it anyway, but to set up book clubs, to set up reading groups, to have festivals. I don't know if anywhere in Bedfordshire has a literary festival, but if you think of what goes on in places like Hay and Wye and some very small towns in counties like Somerset, not big places, but have decided we've got these people who are relevant to the history of our area. Let's put on a festival. Let's do something about this, and people will come to stuff like this. People want to take part in community events. So I think stuff like that is important. I think taking it into schools is important. I'm sure again that is something that the library service starts going into schools, and I think that allowing time for children, particularly because the children are the readers of the future, obviously, to discover these books for themselves, I think is really, really vital. But other media as well. You mentioned the films that have been made. There was a wonderful BBC series back in the 90s, I think, made of The Borrowers, with Ian Holm and Penelope Wilton, I think, was the mum, and I thought that's the best media adaptation of The Borrowers I've ever seen. Right. But it has some good American films as well. Hollywood has done a John Goodman as Pod. So that's important as well. I think it's a whole spider's web. You can't say there's one thing. I'm a radio person, I'm in the media, that's really important, but you're not operating by yourself, are you? You're part of this spider's web of influence, and you throw the pebble in the pond and the ripples spread and spread and spread, and you bring in as much as you can. So everyone has a role, I think.
I'm really appreciative to one of our other guests on this episode, and that is our fantastic teaching staff at Leighton Middle School, who, when we wrote to them and said, your children are existing and you're learning in Mary Norton's old house where she wrote the book, they knew that already, actually. But they did say it's not on our curriculum. However, we would love to do some activities around this and let the children know. Really interesting. Really interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is exactly the sort of thing, isn't it? It's a small-scale community thing that will be another pebble in the pond, and the ripples will spread in different directions. They will spread to the parents, and you know.
So grateful for a school to divert from their curriculum for us, because I understand the pressures of it, and you know, what a wonderful thing that they're doing by saying, do you know what, this doesn't weave into our planned assessments or markers for their learning journey, but we're going to do it anyway because it really matters to our community. I'm so thankful for them for that.
It sounds wonderful. I think, you know, teachers like that are why teachers are so important, I think, and they don't get the support that they need, but you know, they deserve every bit of it. You're absolutely right. Really, really important.
I've put here, and you may not have an answer for this, but I've put here she won the Carnegie Medal from the Library Association in 1952 for the Boroughs.
She did.
I would imagine that is a highly prestigious award.
It is, I mean, the Carnegie Medal is the equivalent of the Booker Prize for fiction, you know, the Man Booker Prize, which is across the world considered probably the highest accolade. In the world of children's literature, the Carnegie is it. And they have very, very clear criteria of books that will win, and that book, it didn't just win in 1952. At a later stage, I can't remember exactly when it was, I think it was sometime in the early years of the 20th century, so it was like 2002 or something like that. They compiled a Carnegie of Carnegies, the best of the best, and the Boroughs was on that list. You know, people have said, I think I may have written, oh yeah, here it is, this is when they did the Carnegie of Carnegies, that this is the one book of the winners of unquestioned timeless genius, and as nearly as perfect a book for children as has ever been written. Now, I think that's really, really pretty amazing, isn't it? So winning the Carnegie is hugely important to writers. And one of the reasons is, but it's more important to readers, because one of the criteria for winning is that the book has to provide the vicarious experience of a world and a life and people which stays with you after reading. And I think the Boroughs absolutely does that vicarious experience. You remember, don't you, how the clocks lived and how they arranged their living room and stuff like that, but you also remember their worries and the issues with the family.
Story Search, Central Bedfordshire.
Trepidation of the migration really stood out for me. And when we think about the issue of migration currently, there's so much to say and not say about that. But, people are on a desperate journey because of environmental factors of war, factors of conflict, being uprooted from their homes, just as the Boroughs were. They were uprooted from their homes. It wasn't safe to stay. They had to escape and leave. I guess much like those, I don't know, I'm thinking of Anne Frank pops to mind. I mean, they had to escape and leave, but they did what they could to try and stay hidden and in the top of the house rather than underneath. But this idea of, we need to find somewhere new to live. You can't imagine, or many people can imagine, because that might be their journey in our community. We don't know what it must feel like to just you have to leave your things and move on, and how scary that journey is. And I thought that was a really interesting part of the story.
It is, isn't it? And I think, the book has been compared to Anne Frank many times because it's very similar. It has, the confinement below the floor as opposed to the confinement in the attic, and the being searched for by evil, Mrs. Driver as a paradigm of the Nazi.
Wow. Okay.
So it's being searched for. So there are definitely similarities there. But I think one of the really shocking things about this refugee thing, it's so recent, it's quite scary. You don't see them as individuals who've lost their homes, who are maybe fleeing from terror or persecution or environmental damage that they can't do anything about. You just see them as a threat. And I think that's one of the very scary bits about some of the social attitudes to people who are less powerful, like the Boroughs, not smaller, not in stature, but in power. How do we help these people, or do we just consider them different and we don't want them? We just get rid of them. So it's a scary comparison, really, isn't it? When you think about it from that point of view.
It's sort of the story of migrating people.
For
so long.
Yes.
And so that sadly makes the book timeless.
It does. It does. Yeah.
Of how it makes it timeless.
This fear of the other is it's a part of humanity, really. But what Norton does in the book, I think, is manage to resolve this fear of the other when she builds the friendship between the boy and Ariete. She is able to show that. How different are they? You know, you've got this giant and this tiny, 6 inches high, I think is about, no, Pod is 6 inches, Ariete probably a bit shorter. This tiny girl. But they build a relationship, they build a friendship, and they share. You know, she can read and he can't, so she helps him, and he in return helps her by giving her things that he sees the family needs, takes letters to her relatives who are living somewhere else, all of this sort of stuff. So she shows that the othering can be overcome, that you can build bridges.
And especially through childhood, because children don't have those those fears that are put upon us in those early stages, do they?
No. I think that's very interesting because Ariete, the fears are there, aren't they, in Pod and Homily? Absolutely. And the fears are quite genuine. You know, the humans can be a threat to the borrowers. But Ariete hasn't internalised those fears in quite the same way, so she can break free of it. And that's a part of Ariete's journey.
I think her only fear is the fear of them knowing. Isn't it? The fear of them finding out.
Yeah, she tries to hide it from her parents that she's been outside and stuff like that, doesn't she? But when they do find out, I think it's rather interesting that even Homily, even the warrior of the family, realises that this is something you just have to do. You know, that you have to come to terms with these changes.
There's a moment,
get on with it.
I'm just looking. Here it is. And we were talking about strong women and the boy. And when the floorboards are lifted back, for me in my copy, it was chapter 15. The floorboards are lifted and the family are discovered. I've written myself in, and then it says he was only a boy after all. So Homily is she's tiny and she's got this bravery, but she sees this is a child. This is not a grown adult. Put it back at once. She kind of has this fearlessness of like, this is just a child. I'm a grown woman and I might be tiny, but I can tell him what he needs to do. And I loved that moment.
Yeah, it's wonderful. She's a mother. So here we have a mother who sees a situation where a child is doing something that they shouldn't do. And she said, no, don't do, put it back. How dare you put it back? Because she's a mother. So she's reacting automatically, that moment in the book. It's not Homily thinking, oh my God, you've taken the floorboards away, blah, 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 blah. It's like, what's going on? This child is misbehaving. It's an instinctive response of a mother to a child doing something wrong. The fact that the child is a giant and the mother is tiny doesn't come into it at all. It is a lovely moment, isn't it? And it shows Homily's strength, I think. Homily can be interpreted as sort of the weak warrior, and she is the warrior. She is the anxious one. Pod is too, to some extent, but Homily more so. But it also shows that underneath it, there's a core of iron in Homily, and this strength comes over in the way she deals with the boy. And when they do escape in the subsequent books in the series, when they're living out in the natural world, Homily, there's one bit I think Pod actually says, I'm not sure if I've got it to hand, but Pod says to Ariete in one of the later books, there are two types of strength, and your mother has got both. So what he means is she has the sort of practical strength to, climb vines and stuff like that she has to do to escape. But she's also got this internal core of strength, which is part of being a mother and a woman in a world where she's had to find that core to survive. And that bit you pointed out is one of those moments, definitely.
And there was this feeling of survival, again, like going back to during lockdown, where a lot of mothers, had this great weight upon them about, trying to make sure everybody had everything they need and life was still fun and, we're still doing all the things and spinning all the plates. And there's a sense of that from her,
There's a definite feeling that despite Pod being the person who goes out to work and does a traditional male, I'm the provider of the family, deep down it's Homily who keeps the family going, as you just pointed out, is very true of the lockdown situation. Even when many people were working from home, well, the statistics have been produced to show this, that even when both parents were working at home, it was often the mother who was doing, the homeschooling, dealing with the supplies for the family, as you've said you were doing, trying to keep things as reasonably okay for their children as they could. The burden on the mother during lockdown was very, very high, definitely, and dealing with the mental load as well. It was all down there. Yeah,
that's something a kind of new concept that we not new in the sense of it's only just started, but a new way of articulating everything that we carry, as parents, not just mothers, but parents also.
Yes.
Because I know a lot of dads have got a different role from what would have existed in Pod's time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's been fantastic having this chat with you about the borrowers.
It's been lovely.
And I had no idea when I picked up that book. I put it off actually for a month or two. I thought, a children's book. I'm not in that headspace right now, and my children aren't quite at the right stages for me to read it to them, either too young or too independent.
Right.
And so I thought, I'm going to have to read this on my own. And I put it off, and then I started. And when I started to make notes and notice themes and things coming out, I thought, no, this is lovely. And
it is.
It is comfortingly relevant, but also sadly still relevant in many ways. Change has not quite happened in some directions. Maybe it should have, is what the book is telling me. I don't know.
Yes. I think that's the interesting thing about it, isn't it? There is a comfort about the book in the detail of the book. The lovely details of how the borrowers live, and you could designate it as a very cosy book from that point of view. But then there are the other things where it points up social problems that are still with us, 70 years later, and don't look like they're going to go away. So in that sense, it can be an uncomfortable book. It can be a demanding book to read because you want to think everything in the universe is lovely, and it isn't. But I think for children, and it's interesting what you just said about the school and what they're learning, children are very much aware of this. If you look at what's going on with environmental issues, it's often young people who are the most determined and the most angry and the most concerned to do something about this. Mary Norton, in her own notes about the book, here's the right bit of paper. Oh, here we go. This is what Mary Norton said. She said, the book has, quote, something of the human dilemma. In each generation, only youth is restless and brave enough to get out from under the floorboards. And it is a microcosm of our world and the powers that rule us. Now, she said that in 1960, and I think it's still the case, actually, which makes the book so important.
And I can't wait to talk to our children about their consideration of the tiny people and the strong women in their lives and the inspiration that they get from those, because I think we're going to really feel that energy from that group.
Absolutely. Yeah. How old are the children that the teacher is working with?
I think they will be year 7, so I think we're looking at age 11. And,
10 or 11. That's a wonderful year to work with.
Thank you so much for giving your time for Mary, really, and our children in the community who need to know about this.
Yeah, it's been lovely to talk to you, and I've thoroughly enjoyed revisiting these books. It was a revelation for me as well. Really enjoyed it.
I've got Julia and I've got Ailey.
I'm Elif and I'm 11 years old.
I'm Ella and I'm also 11.
So my name's Bertie, I'm 12 years old.
Hi, I'm Ollie and I'm 12 years old.
In our podcast about Leighton Buzzard, we have been discussing an important woman to Leighton Buzzard actually, and her name's Mary Norton. But have you heard of Mary Norton?
The author of The Borrowers, it was these little creatures who lived under the floorboards.
Yeah, she lived here before the school was turned into a school.
Yes. So you haven't written about Mary Norton, you've been thinking about women that are inspirational to you.
Yeah. Well, I put Malala Yousafzai.
Malala Yousafzai, I think her name is. Yeah. And what about her?
Where she was living, women ran around to be educated, but yet she still chose to run to school, even for basically illegal. So she's the youngest person ever to win the Nobel Peace Prize. She lived in Pakistan. She went to school with some other girls. Her father ran that school. When the Taliban arrived, they forbade women from going to school, and she fought against that, and she spoke up for women's right to go to school and to learn.
She was actually attacked, wasn't she? And
yeah, she was shot in the head while she was on the bus.
She made her inspirational to me because she got shot and she made it out alive, and she also protests for girls to have education as well as boys.
And what sort of qualities do you need to be somebody that is that?
You need bravery.
So you have been studying her in your lessons, or is that just someone you're interested in generally?
I have a book about her.
I Am Malala, is it? Yes, nice.
Well, I would say we've done a bit, but not that much.
She wrote a book called I Am Malala,
yes,
her autobiography, and I need to check, but I'm pretty certain we would have that at Central Bedfordshire Libraries, which is where we work. So if anybody else is interested in Malala's story, they can probably go there and check out her work. Any teachers here that have really helped either of you that you think, do you know what, they're pretty good at what they do, and I'm really glad that they're in my life?
Yeah,
you have got a few. We're not going to name them. No. They know who they are. You'll let them know. And tell me then, Bertie, what have you come up with? Who have you chosen?
So I chose Greta Thunberg, and she's a really famous climate activist that did fight really hard for climate change.
And what qualities do you think Greta needed to get her argument across to everybody in the world?
She was really strong-willed and also a really good speaker. So I know she managed to get into a climate conference, and I have seen her speech, and it is really, really inspirational. So she's a really good speaker, and she did really fight for what she believed was right.
Did she not controversially refuse to go to school?
She did, but it was for the right cause. So she basically just well, we need this to happen, and I will sacrifice my own well-being to make sure this happens, which I thought was very impressive, and it really helped me think about just going the extra milestone for the environment.
So it was almost like a just cause, is what we're saying. So even though going to school is important and we know that, not going to school to wake the world up to the problems in the environment.
Exactly.
Makes sense in this situation.
It does.
Yeah. Who have you chosen?
I chose Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift.
I'm a Swiftie because her songs are really catchy, and they're quite popular, which makes her songs more like she gets more money for them.
Okay.
And her voice is really good, which is what I like about her.
So by writing the songs, she's kind of created a powerful empire, hasn't she? Because she's a clever businesswoman. She's getting all of the royalties from the songs. Have you got a favourite song?
Cruel Summer.
Oh yes, we love that one. That is a big popular song, isn't it?
Yeah.
Have you got any intentions of going to see her live?
Yeah.
What sort of qualities as a woman in the pop industry do you think you need? Because it can be a difficult job, that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What sort of qualities do you think she needs to survive and do well?
You need to have a good voice.
So that sounds like taking care of your health and practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of practice.
Really important. Go on then, tell me then, Elif.
I did Jennifer Aniston.
Oh.
Because she's dyslexic like me.
Okay.
And when she reads all her verses and lines, she doesn't make any mistakes, which really inspires me.
So what kind of mindset do you need then to make sure that being dyslexic is not a barrier to get in your way? What do
you need to be very positive and knowing that you can do it, so you can actually complete it and make sure you do it properly.
I know he's not an inspirational woman, but Jamie Oliver's a massive inspiration to me. He's dyslexic and he's one of the biggest published authors in the world ever with all of his recipe books, isn't he? Yeah. And so, yes, tell me more. What else have you written about Jennifer Aniston?
I said that she's an amazing actor, and when she does all her verses and lines, and she just does it all perfectly and doesn't make any mistakes, or she's in loads of films and stuff, which makes me feel that you can do anything if you're dyslexic.
Absolutely. Has there been times where you thought, maybe I can't do well, or this is too much of a challenge, and who has helped you through that? Obviously in school that I've struggled in work, but all my teachers and people help me with my learning and stuff. We think we're coming here to talk to you guys about characters or inspirational women, and we end up leaving thinking those actual pupils at Leighton Middle School are really inspiring. So that's really awesome. So thank you. Jennifer Aniston, I did not know was dyslexic, and what does that tell us? That it really doesn't get in people's way, because I had no clue. So thank you for teaching me something new. Can I ask you then, Ailey, who have you written about? I can see you've put Malala, but who else have you got?
I've written about Greta Thunberg as my main person, but I also put down Malala and Frida Kahlo and Serena and Venus Williams.
Tell me about the Williams sisters. Why them?
They're tennis players, and they were when they were younger, they went to the tennis courts every day to play tennis with their father, and that takes a lot of devotion. And they were basically entering a white-dominated sport, and they got to the top. Amazing.
And so what qualities do you think you need to have as a person to be able to get through that
I think you need to, if you're inspirational, you need to have the ability to communicate, and you need to be able to persevere, and you need the ability to make someone feel passionate about something.
I agree, and I think they were passionate about tennis. And who else have we talked about? Malala, passionate about
education.
Education.
More specifically, education for women.
And here we are today talking to two fantastic girls, young women, about education and about books that are inspirational and characters. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you wanted to tell us about inspirational women, anything you thought about?
With Greta Thunberg, she managed to convince her parents to change their way of life so that it helped the environment better. Her mum's an opera singer, and she doesn't fly to her operas anymore. She takes the train.
And is there anything about the world that you think you would like to change, or you'd like to set an example on? Things that could be better?
Definitely we need to help the environment more.
How can we do that, do you think?
Well, first of all, we could try and recycle more plastic, because marine animals, they often get caught in it and then just die.
And try and reduce landfill if there's any way to do that, because there's loads of rubbish just heaped up in the ground, and that can't be good.
I agree. And I'm glad that you have these concerns and that you hopefully going to work with everybody and all of us and inspire some change. It's really interesting, because I thought that I was coming here to talk about inspirational women you'd written about, but I'm completely inspired by your ideas, and I think that's really cool. So I'm glad to have come to Leighton Middle School, to have walked through where Mary Norton has existed and written her work, and was inspired to write The Borrowers, about tiny inspirational little women actually, and to hear about the women you've been thinking about. So thank you to you and your teachers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Story Search, celebrating arts and culture across Central Bedfordshire.
Well, Cassandra, what a journey you have been on. It's been absolutely fascinating. What would you say your key takeaways are from this adventure that you've been on?
How you can live in Central Bedfordshire and still not really know the incredible history and heritage that you walk amongst. How we are privileged to have such great writers amongst us, and what an awesome person Mary Norton was. She, when interviewed, always suggested that she didn't write the book with themes, she just wrote it to be a nice story for children. But unfortunately, when we are so great at writing a book, we can't help but incorporate the time we live in, as Kay has explained. I had my mind blown by Kay, who just really did a great job of unpicking the book for us. And how fantastic it is that a new generation of children are uncovering their own heroes. My biggest piece of learning from the whole experience is, just as Kay said at the very beginning, at the beginning of this episode, part 1, children's literature, if it's good literature, is just good literature. It doesn't matter if it's written with children in mind. An adult can enjoy a children's book and find so many more things within it than a child might notice. And I think that's very clever writing. And how great is Mary to be able to bring us this story forever.
I couldn't agree more. I'm so thankful that you forced me into reading a book, and I might read some more fiction as a result. But I would suggest to anyone that, it's okay to have a look in the children's section for those classic novels. I've learnt so much. I'm an absolute convert, and I'm now very proud to know that Mary Norton is a Central Bedfordian, or was a Central Bedfordian. I really feel like it adds a string to my bow as a local person here. It's really been wonderful. So next time it's my go, and I'm actually taking you with me.
Is that because I'm good at tech?
Because it wouldn't be recorded without you. So do you want to know where we're going?
I would love to know. Where are we heading to next? We're leaving Leighton Buzzard and heading which direction?
I don't know.
East.
I follow a sat nav.
East and a bit north. Okay.
The other end of Central Bedfordshire. I'm taking you to the wild world of Biggleswade.
Ooh.
Yeah, we're going to learn a lot about rural industry, rural innovation, some inventors of some things that people may be quite surprised about. We're going to 2 great places, the Shuttleworth Collection and Jordan's Mill, which we will wax lyrical about when we go, because they're just great places if you haven't been already. Anyway, we will explore all of that next time.
Perfect. Thank you. See you soon.
It's really something, the treasures all around us we might find, left all around me is a secret shrouded by a veil of time. I'll share it with you, 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 I'll share it with you.